Lila was the kind of mother everyone in Willow Creek admired. She was often seen pushing Danny in his stroller through the town's narrow streets, her smile bright and genuine. Danny, with his dark curls and gap-toothed grin, was the town's little darling. He attended every community fair, every church gathering, always at Lila's side. She made sure he was dressed neatly, his tiny shoes polished, his hair perfectly combed. Mothers in the community would smile at her, sometimes with a twinge of envy, admiring how she seemed to manage single motherhood with such grace. There were whispers, of course. It was a small town. Whispers were inevitable. Lila's husband had vanished long before Danny was born, she said. She never spoke much about him, only that he was gone, and that was enough to quiet any questions. Lila had always been private, a little withdrawn, but her devotion to Danny was public and constant. She threw him grand birthday parties every year, always inviting the neighborhood children to play games and eat cake. Candles were blown out, songs were sung, and every moment was captured in photographs that she proudly displayed on her walls and on social media. To the people of Willow Creek, Lila was a testament to resilience. A single mother doing it all, juggling work, parenting, and community involvement. She attended every school function, every parent-teacher conference, even though few could recall actually seeing Danny at these events. When asked, Lila always had an explanation. Oh, he was a little sick that day, or he had to visit his grandmother out of town. Mothers would nod, sympathizing with the plight of raising a child alone. No one questioned it. Why would they? Lila's small house was always immaculate, her lawn trimmed with precision. Danny's toys were scattered across the yard. Trucks, balls, a little red wagon that she would sometimes pull along the street as if Danny were just around the corner, waiting to hop in. She would wave to neighbors as they passed by, always with that familiar smile, always with that hint of pride that only a mother could have. But if you looked closely, there were signs. Little things that, at the time, seemed like nothing more than quirks. Danny never seemed to age in the photographs. He was always the same height, the same bright-eyed boy with the same gap-toothed smile. Neighbors saw him playing in the yard, but no one could recall a single conversation with him. His voice was never heard shouting from the street or calling for his mother. When other children would gather to play, Danny was always inside resting or at his grandmother's. But in Willow Creek, people minded their own business. Lila was a good mother, that was enough. Or so they thought. Willow Creek was a place where memories settled like dust, familiar and undisturbed. Streets were lined with faded picket fences and old brick buildings that had seen generations come and go. The townspeople moved at a pace that seemed unhurried by the passing of time, and their stories intertwined with the roots of towering oaks that had stood for more than a century. In a town like this, people noticed things like how Danny was always around, but somehow never quite there. It wasn't that people didn't see him. He was at every parade, perched on Lila's hip, waving to floats as they drifted by with ribbons and balloons. He attended church services, clutching his mother's hand as she knelt to pray. He even showed up in community photographs, grinning beside Lila at the annual 4th of July picnic, peeking from behind her at the town Christmas tree lighting. Yet, there was a strange quality to his presence. Fleeting, ghost-like. School teachers would nod politely when Lila spoke of Danny's progress. He's so smart, she would boast. He's reading at a level way above his age. Neighbors listened, smiling with polite admiration. Yet, none of the teachers had ever taught him. When questions arose about where Danny went to school, Lila would smile knowingly and say he was homeschooled, that he learned best in a one-on-one environment. People accepted it, why wouldn't they? Lila was dedicated, always talking about the books she read to him, the field trips she planned. If she said she homeschooled Danny, then she homeschooled Danny. But then there were the questions that slipped through the cracks of small-town politeness. A neighbor would casually mention that they hadn't seen Danny playing with the other kids at the park. Lila would laugh it off, saying he was shy, more comfortable with his toys at home. Another neighbor once asked why Danny never seemed to be at the pediatrician's office. She knew the nurse there and had never seen his name on the appointment list. Lila's smile tightened just a little that time. She said Danny had a private doctor, out of town, someone she trusted completely. The conversation ended there, as it always did. Over time, people stopped asking. After all, Danny was Lila's pride and joy. She spoke about him constantly, shared pictures of his art projects, his adventures, his milestones. Every year, like clockwork, she threw him a birthday party. There were balloons, presents, even a cake with his name neatly written in blue frosting. Children from the neighborhood would come, and Lila would lead them in games and sing happy birthday, her voice loud and bright. But Danny never quite seemed to join the fun. He was always on the periphery watching. Quiet, observant, and when the party ended and the children went home, Lila would wave them off with a smile, Danny standing beside her, hand in hers. It wasn't until Danny's supposed 12th birthday that anyone began to truly wonder. That year, the cake was made, the balloons tied to the porch, but the kids never came. Parents whispered about how their invitations hadn't arrived, how Lila seemed distracted lately, more withdrawn. Danny never showed up at school that fall, even though by now he should have been enrolled. When Officer Jennings received a call from a concerned neighbor, it felt routine at first, just another welfare check. But when he walked up the steps of Lila's house and knocked on the door, he had no idea what he was about to uncover. Officer Jennings was not the sort of man who rattled easily. His tall frame and steady gaze had a way of commanding attention, and he moved through the small town of Willow Creek with a quiet assurance. He knew everyone by name, remembered their children's birthdays, and was often seen sipping coffee at Maggie's diner during his morning rounds. So when the call came in about Danny, he chalked it up to small-town gossip, nothing more than idle whispers drifting from porch to porch. But a job was a job, and he had learned long ago not to dismiss concerns, no matter how far-fetched they seemed. Lila's house was nestled at the edge of Willow Creek, just where the pavement began to crack and give way to gravel. It was painted a soft blue, shutters neatly hung, flowers and pots lining the front steps. A bicycle, rusted and unused, leaned against the porch railing, its wheels tangled with dandelions that had gone to seed. Jennings knocked firmly, 3 times. He waited, the sound of his knuckles echoing off the siding. A full minute passed before he heard the shuffle of footsteps. Lila opened the door with that familiar smile, her hair swept back in a loose ponytail, flour dusted across her hands as if she had been baking. "Officer Jennings," she greeted him warmly. "What brings you out here?" Jennings adjusted his belt, glancing past her shoulder into the dimly lit hallway. "Just a routine check, Lila. Some folks mentioned they haven't seen Danny around lately. Thought I'd stop by, say hello." His tone was casual, the sort of neighborly conversation that happened 1,000 times in Willow Creek. Lila's smile faltered just a fraction. "Oh, he's around. You know how kids are, always off on adventures. He's visiting his grandma this week, actually." She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the doorframe, her eyes meeting his. "Would you like to come in?" Jennings hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "If you don't mind, sure." He stepped over the threshold, the smell of lavender and fresh bread filling his senses. The house was immaculate, as always. Photographs lined the walls, Danny at the park, Danny on his birthday, Danny with Lila at the church picnic. There were crayon drawings pinned to the refrigerator and a pair of small shoes neatly tucked by the door. It all seemed perfect, but as Jennings walked through the living room, something gnawed at him. He couldn't quite place it at first, the feeling of unease that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. His eyes drifted to a family portrait framed above the mantel. Danny stood beside Lila, his hand clasped in hers, eyes bright with mischief. The photograph looked recent, untouched by the yellowing of time. But there was something too pristine about it. No fingerprints on the glass, no dust on the frame. As if it had been placed there yesterday. Jennings cleared his throat. "Mind if I ask you a few questions, Lila? Just routine." Her smile returned, tight but pleasant. "Of course." He pulled out his notepad, flipping it open with practiced ease. "Just need to verify a few things. Danny's birth date?" Lila rattled it off, without hesitation. Jennings scribbled it down. "And his school?" "I couldn't find his records at Willow Creek Elementary." Lila's eyes flickered, just for a moment. "He's homeschooled. I keep all his records here. You're welcome to look if you'd like." Jennings nodded, his gaze hardening just slightly. "That'd be great." What Lila didn't know was that Jennings had already checked. There were no state records of homeschooling. No standardized test filings. No doctor visits. Nothing. As if Danny had never existed at all. Jennings left Lila's house with more questions than answers. Something about her answers didn't sit right. Not the words themselves, but the way she said them. Too smooth. Too ready. The moment he stepped back onto the porch, the air felt different, heavier. The sun had begun to dip, casting long shadows across the lawn. That red wagon still sat under the porch light, its handle pointed toward the street, as if waiting for someone who'd never come back. Back at the station, he decided to dig deeper. He didn't need a warrant to ask around, and in a place like Willow Creek, people talked freely, especially to Jennings. Over the next few days, he spoke casually with those closest to Lila. Miss Doris, who lived 2 doors down, had always liked Lila but admitted something odd. I used to wave at Danny all the time through the window, but he never waved back. Quiet little thing. Then there was Mark, who had been to a couple of Danny's birthdays with his own kids. He was there, he said, scratching his head. I think, though now that you ask, I don't remember him saying much. Or moving around much, really. Jennings pressed further. Did he ever play with your son? Mark furrowed his brow. No. I remember Lila saying he was shy. But now that you mention it, I don't think Danny ever came outside when we visited. Not once. That was the pattern. Everyone had seen Danny from afar. In windows. In pictures. Standing next to Lila at the grocery store. But no one could remember hearing his voice. No one had touched his hand, seen him run, or watched him cry. There were no skinned knees, no tantrums, no ordinary messes that children leave behind. Just stories. Stories Lila told with such sincerity that no one had dared question them. Jennings pulled up Lila's social media accounts. Danny's life was well documented. Birthday parties, holidays, silly moments with their cat. But the images raised red flags the more he studied them. Danny's height never seemed to change. His hairstyle stayed eerily consistent. Even his clothes repeated in subtle ways, just enough to be overlooked, until now. And in every photo, he was either turned slightly away from the camera, filtered through blurs of motion, or partially obscured behind Lila. He brought the photos to a colleague who dabbled in digital forensics. These aren't normal, the expert said bluntly. There's some manipulation here. Layers, cut edges. Looks like parts were merged from stock images. And this one? He pointed to a picture of Danny holding a toy. That's not a real shadow. It's painted in. Jennings felt his stomach turn. He returned to Lila's house the next day, not with casual questions, but with purpose. She answered the door again, but this time her eyes darted behind him, scanning for signs of backup. I'd like to see Danny, Jennings said firmly. Now. Lila's mouth opened, then closed. She stepped aside without a word, her face suddenly drained of color. He entered, eyes scanning the living room. Everything was just as neat, just as carefully placed. But now he noticed details he hadn't before. The family photos were all recent, but all from the same handful of settings. The crayon drawings were too perfect, too symmetrical, the kind that came pre-printed in coloring books. He stepped into what was supposed to be Danny's room. His breath caught. The bed was made, untouched. Toys sat perfectly aligned on shelves. And in the center of the room, facing the window, sat a child-sized mannequin dressed in pajamas. Its plastic hand rested on a stuffed bear. Jennings froze. The mannequin sat eerily still in the fading light, the fabric of its pajamas stretched tightly over molded limbs, a painted smile just visible in the dusk. It was the same face he'd seen in photos, a child frozen in time, expressionless, vacant. The stuffed bear in its lap was spotless, untouched by the rough affection of a real child. The whole room was like a shrine, pristine, curated, suffocatingly quiet. Lila stood behind him in the doorway, her arms folded, her gaze steady but unreadable. This is Danny's room? Jennings asked, his voice low and measured. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes rested on the mannequin, as if seeing something Jennings couldn't. Finally she nodded. He's not here right now. But this is his space. Jennings turned to face her fully. Lila, that's not a child. That's a mannequin. Something in her composure wavered, a flicker behind her eyes like a light bulb struggling to hold on. But she said nothing, just turned and walked out of the room, down the hall, as if the conversation was over. Jennings followed, unwilling to let the moment slip away. In the living room, he scanned the framed photos again with fresh eyes. There, Danny on a swing, but the swing's ropes cast no shadow. Danny blowing out candles, though the flame on the cake hadn't flickered. His expressions didn't change from year to year. His hands were always in similar positions. The backgrounds were recycled. Subtle digital alterations, the kind only noticeable if you knew what to look for. He called for backup. Quietly, calmly. Then he asked Lila to sit down. I need to ask you something, he said, pulling out his notepad. When was the last time anyone other than you saw Danny in person? Lila looked at him, blinking slowly. Her hands twisted in her lap. People see him all the time, she replied, almost in a whisper. At church. In the yard. He's shy, that's all. Lila, no one can remember hearing him speak. No teachers have taught him. No doctors have treated him. There are no school records, no birth certificate, no medical file. Nothing exists outside of this house. Her eyes brimmed with something. Anger? Fear? Maybe both. You don't know what it's like, she snapped, her voice rising. Raising a child on your own. Trying to keep them safe. People judge. People take things. The statement hung in the air like fog. Jennings studied her carefully. Is there a child, Lila? Was there ever? She stared at the wall behind him, lips parted but silent. Then she stood and walked to a tall cabinet in the corner of the room. From it, she pulled a stack of photo albums, dozens of them, each one meticulously labeled by year. She handed one to him without a word. Inside, page after page of photos showed Danny's life in obsessive detail. There he was building a snowman, reading a book, holding a kitten. But on closer inspection, every image was slightly off. Heads too still, hands too smooth, lighting inconsistent with the environment. Jennings knew then, with a sick certainty, Danny was never real. Lila had crafted him from fragments, dolls, photos, shadows. A life built on absence, stitched together with lies. The truth, when it finally broke the surface, felt colder than any winter Willow Creek had ever known. Officer Jennings sat at his desk that night with the photo albums spread out before him like crime scene evidence. Each glossy page was a layer of fiction, a glimpse into the depths of a carefully constructed illusion. But it wasn't just the photos. Security footage from Lila's home, captured from a newly installed neighborhood security system across the street, revealed something far stranger than even Jennings expected. Over the past year, Lila could be seen bringing the mannequin in and out of the house, positioning it on the porch swing, propping it upright in the passenger seat of her car. There were no interactions, no gestures exchanged, only Lila adjusting its clothes, brushing its synthetic hair, talking to it with the affectionate tones of a mother speaking to a living child. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic coping mechanism. But as the investigation deepened, it became clear. This wasn't grief. It wasn't denial. It was something darker. Jennings sat with Lila again, this time in an interview room with a camera rolling and a lawyer observing silently from the corner. You went to great lengths, Lila, Jennings said gently. Why? Why create a child? Lila's eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She tilted her head as if the question surprised her. I didn't create him, she whispered. He's mine. Jennings remained quiet, letting the silence stretch. I gave him a life, she continued. A home. A story. He just couldn't be around all the time. Why not? Her gaze drifted. It wasn't safe. The world isn't safe for little black boys. Not out there. But in here. She tapped her temple with a trembling finger. He was safe with me. Loved. Happy. The legal path ahead was already forming, but Jennings couldn't shake the weight of her words. This wasn't a simple case of mental illness. It was deliberate, orchestrated, and disturbingly well executed. The security footage from inside her house confirmed the extent of the deception. Hidden cameras showed Lila setting up entire scenes. Breakfast at the kitchen table with Danny seated stiffly, his hand curled around a spoon. Her voice filling the silence. Eat up, baby. A birthday party with party hats perched on stuffed animals, Lila clapping alone as she guided the mannequin's hands toward the cake. Each act was rehearsed. Each gesture controlled. She filmed herself tucking him in, reading bedtime stories, even arguing with him in staged disciplinary moments, all alone, all for the camera. The illusion had become a way of life. What disturbed Jennings most was how easily everyone had believed it. The power of suggestion, the trust of familiarity, it had been enough to keep questions at bay for over a decade. But the cracks had been there all along, the never-changing photos, the excuses, the phantom child. And through it all, Lila never wavered. I didn't lie, she said softly during one final interview. I just protected him, the best I could. But Jennings knew the truth now. Danny hadn't just disappeared. He had never existed at all. The illusion may have fooled neighbors and friends, but paper trails do not lie. Once Jennings officially escalated the investigation, the state auditor's office and Department of Human Services were brought in. What they uncovered beneath the layers of fabricated motherhood was a cold, calculated scheme stretching back 12 years. Lila hadn't just created a fantasy, she had monetized it. Bank records, benefit applications, and court filings began to tell a story far less innocent than the image of a protective, grieving mother. Lila had received government assistance for over a decade. Food stamps, Medicaid reimbursements, housing vouchers, and monthly welfare payments, all designated for a dependent child, Danny. The amount totaled more than $200,000 over 12 years. And it didn't stop there. Lila had fabricated a custody battle. Court records from 2015 showed her petitioning for child support from a man named Marcus Delaney, listed as Danny's estranged father. But when investigators dug into Marcus's identity, they found he didn't exist. The social security number on the documents was fake. The address led to an abandoned property 2 counties over. Even the birth certificate for Danny listed Marcus as the father, his signature present in shaky ink at the bottom. Forensic analysts confirmed what Jennings suspected. The signature was Lila's own handwriting, manipulated to look masculine, scrawled with her non-dominant hand. The entire ecosystem of Danny's life had been engineered. There were school transcripts with fabricated grades and notes, letters from teachers that had never worked in the district, immunization records created using blank hospital templates. Lila had accessed old forms from her time as a nurse's assistant, then filled them out herself, forging doctor names and clinic numbers. She'd even gone so far as to join online parenting groups under fake accounts, posing as Danny's father to offer validation of his existence, referencing holidays, co-parenting struggles, and shared custody woes. This wasn't grief. This wasn't delusion. This was fraud. The prosecutors began to build their case around intent. Every action Lila took was deliberate. Every form she submitted, every document she forged, showed a level of premeditation that painted a chilling portrait. The mannequin wasn't just for show. It was a prop in an elaborate stage play meant to deceive not just neighbors but the entire system. As the truth spread, the community began to reel. Teachers who'd exchanged polite nods with Lila at supposed school meetings now realized those meetings had been smoke and mirrors. Churchgoers who had blessed little Danny in Sunday prayers now sat in stunned silence. And Jennings, who'd once thought he was responding to a missing child, now found himself the key witness in a web of deceit so intricate it had lasted over a decade. The irony was suffocating. For years, Lila had presented herself as a fiercely loving mother, tirelessly devoted. She had crafted Facebook posts about Danny's favorite meals, his fear of thunder, his dreams of being an astronaut. But it was all an invention, a mother's devotion to a lie. And the worst part, no one saw it coming. The deeper investigators went, the more grotesque the invention became. What started as a false identity for a child slowly unraveled into an entire imaginary family tree. Marcus Delaney, Danny's so-called father, was the first domino. There were court filings, email exchanges, and even birthday cards supposedly sent from him. They all traced back to one source, Lila. She had used burner phones to text herself under different names, printed and mailed cards with unfamiliar postmarks using old stationery from a closed-down office supply store in town. In her computer, hidden beneath layers of folders named innocuous things like Bill's 2014 or Danny's projects, they found files labeled Legal Docs MD, Custody Round 2, and Father's Day_apply. Each one was a meticulously crafted fiction. Correspondences between her and Marcus, appointment schedules, alleged threats, and heartfelt reconciliations that never actually happened. Her emails, when combed through, revealed years of role-playing. One thread even showed her posing as Marcus, corresponding with a parenting forum, seeking advice on how to co-parent with a difficult but loving mother. She built Marcus as a man who'd abandoned his son, but was trying to reconnect, a character full of regret, which only deepened the sympathy Lila received in real life. People had believed her. Neighbors brought casseroles after her court dates. Church friends offered to pray for healing between her and Marcus. She used their concern like currency, building trust with stories tailored to the listener. One neighbor remembered her crying over a lost custody battle. Another recalled seeing a man in a hoodie leaving her house late one night, someone she now realized may have been no more than Lila herself moving mannequins or creating a scene for the story she was carefully weaving. Financial records unearthed another layer. She'd filed tax returns listing a dependent every single year, Danny. Refunds were larger because of him. Grants were approved for single mothers. She even attempted, unsuccessfully, to get assistance through a special needs subsidy program. When investigators asked why go to such lengths, Lila gave only fragments. Danny gave me purpose, she said in one recorded interview. He made me feel seen. People cared because I had him. They listened to me. Helped me. Jennings sat behind the glass during that statement, jaw clenched. It was the most honest thing she'd said yet. In the end, the fictional ex-husband was not just a detail, it was a cornerstone. Marcus gave her legitimacy. He was the reason Danny existed on paper, the reason she was allowed to claim benefits, the reason no one ever dug too deep. She played both sides of a tragedy she'd invented, a mother abandoned and a child torn between worlds. But there was no world, no child, no father, just Lila. And now that her fantasy had collapsed under the weight of reality, what remained wasn't just fraud. It was something that made everyone in Willow Creek stop and ask themselves a chilling question. If a person can fabricate love, grief, and even family, how well do we really know anyone? Willow Creek had always prided itself on being a place where people knew their neighbors. The kind of town where doors were left unlocked, where the coffee shop clerk knew your order by heart, where secrets didn't last more than a day or two. But Lila's lie had shattered that illusion. When the news broke, it didn't come as a headline. It spread like wildfire through whispers, text messages, and stunned phone calls. Did you hear about Lila? There was no Danny. No Danny. 12 years, how could we miss it? The town reeled. People who had stood beside Lila at church now found themselves scrubbing memories for clues they'd overlooked. Reverend Marshall, who'd blessed Danny during 3 Easter services, sat quietly in his office, a photo of one of those Sundays trembling in his hand. "We prayed for a boy who wasn't there," he murmured. "What does that say about us?" At Willow Creek Elementary, teachers gathered in the lounge, stunned. "She told us he was homeschooled," one said. "She showed us worksheets, she had grades. I never thought to question it." Parents recalled birthday parties where Danny was present, but not participating. Some even remembered thinking he was unwell, perhaps developmentally delayed, and didn't want to pry. "I thought she was just being protective," one mother confessed. "You never question that. You don't." In hindsight, the signs were there. The unchanged photos. The mannequin glimpsed through curtains, but never quite confirmed. One neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, admitted she'd once seen Lila carrying what she thought was a lifelike doll from the car, wrapped in a blanket. "I thought maybe Danny was asleep. Or sick. It just wasn't my business." But now it was everyone's business. Trust, once taken for granted, began to erode. If someone as seemingly loving, as involved and kind-hearted as Lila could construct a 12-year deception, who else was hiding behind a smile? Who else was performing? The town's heartbeat shifted. Parents clutched their children tighter. Conversations turned sharper. Gossip, once harmless, now carried weight. The local Facebook group lit up with debates and accusations. "We failed her. No, she lied to all of us. It's mental illness. It's fraud, plain and simple." Jennings, now caught in the middle of media requests and internal investigations, kept returning to the same question. Why did no one look closer? He met with a group of community leaders to help manage the fallout. They arranged town meetings, encouraged counseling sessions, and tried to foster unity. But the damage was done. The betrayal was too personal, too deep. People who had once admired Lila now recoiled at the memory of hugging her, of handing her casseroles, of telling her how proud she must be of her son. There was shame, guilt, even anger, not just at her but at themselves. Lila had fooled them all. And somehow, the most disturbing part wasn't the mannequin or the fake documents. It was how effortlessly the entire community had accepted the fantasy. Because in Willow Creek, being seen as a good mother meant no one looked beyond the surface. Lila didn't confess so much as collapse. The truth slipped from her in pieces, like a dam slowly breaking under the pressure of years of lies. She sat across from Officer Jennings in a gray-walled interview room, her hair pulled back, her hands nervously fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. At first, she denied everything, claimed Danny had simply run away, that he was different, needed to be protected, and couldn't live the kind of life other children did. But Jennings didn't press. He waited. And in that long, heavy silence, something inside her gave way. "I didn't mean to lie," she whispered. "Not at first." Jennings tilted his head slightly. "Tell me what happened." Lila's voice wavered. "After my mother died, I didn't have anyone. No family, no friends. I'd lost the baby 2 months before. Miscarried. No one even knew I was pregnant." Her eyes drifted to the corner of the room. "And I thought, if I told people he lived, maybe I could too." That was the first time Jennings saw something close to genuine emotion. Not sorrow, not guilt, but the deep, hollow ache of someone who had lived too long inside their own fiction. "I bought the mannequin the same year," she continued. "It was just supposed to be for comfort, like a placeholder. But then people asked about him, and it felt good, to say he was okay, to say I was okay." Jennings didn't interrupt. He let her unravel herself. "Once I told the first lie, I couldn't stop. I had to keep making it real. I made scrapbooks, birthday cards, medical records. I studied what kids his age should be doing, so I could make it sound right. The teachers, the parents, the neighbors, they wanted to believe in Danny. She looked at Jennings now, her eyes red and swollen. They needed to believe in him. A black boy, safe and loved and thriving. I gave them that. I gave myself that. Did you know it was wrong? Jennings asked quietly. She nodded, tears finally spilling. Every single day. Her attorney, seated beside her, rested a hand lightly on her arm but said nothing. There was nothing to say. The confession wasn't a strategy, it was surrender. From that point, the interrogation turned into something else, not about proving her guilt, but understanding the depth of it. Lila had recorded herself acting out Danny's milestones, his first steps, first words, even his first day of school. She had purchased child-sized clothes and carefully aged them over time with wear and stain. She even bought new sizes, folding them into the closet to simulate his growth. The lengths she went to weren't just to defraud the government. They were to make the lie feel true. When Jennings stood to leave, Lila asked one question, voice hoarse. "Do you hate me?" He paused, hand on the door. "No," he said, "but I can't forgive what you took from this town. Because it wasn't just money or trust. It was belief. And belief, once broken, rarely returns whole." Before the mannequin. Before the photos. Before Danny even had a name, there was just Lila, alone, sitting on the edge of a narrow twin bed in a dim apartment that still smelled like antiseptic. The curtains were drawn shut, but daylight leaked in through the edges like judgment. The air was thick with summer heat, but she hadn't opened a window in days. Sweat clung to her skin, but she didn't move. On the nightstand sat a paper bracelet from the hospital, a stained sonogram folded in half, and a stuffed bear someone had left at the foot of her bed like a condolence gift. She had stopped answering the phone. The food in the kitchen spoiled in silence. Her mother's picture sat on the dresser beside an unopened condolence card from the church. She rocked slightly, hands folded over her belly, not protectively but reflexively, like her body hadn't yet accepted the absence. Her face was blank, but her eyes were not. They stared into something that wasn't there. And in that stillness, a thought came, not frantic, not dramatic, just a whisper. What if he had lived? The room remained quiet. No answer came. But Lila didn't need one. She reached for the bear and held it close, brushing her cheek against its synthetic fur. The tears didn't fall. Not yet. Not until the whisper became a story. A name. A birthday. A child who smiled. That was the beginning. The morning Lila was arrested, Willow Creek felt different. A heavy stillness lingered in the air, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. She didn't fight. Didn't cry. When Officer Jennings knocked on her door with the warrant in hand, she opened it slowly, already dressed, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She wore a pale yellow cardigan, the same one she'd worn in countless pictures with Danny. Her hands trembled only slightly as she turned around to be handcuffed. Word spread fast. By the time she was placed in the back of the squad car, a small group of neighbors had gathered, eyes wide with disbelief, arms folded against their chests like shields. No one said anything. Some didn't know what to feel: betrayal, pity, disgust, even heartbreak. A few cried silently. Jennings didn't speak to her as he drove her to the station. They rode in silence, the low hum of tires on pavement the only sound between them. She stared out the window, watching the town pass her by for what might be the last time. At the courthouse, media vans had already begun to arrive, tipped off by early leaks from the investigation. What had started as a quiet welfare check had become national news. Mother fakes child's existence for 12 years in elaborate fraud scheme. The courtroom was packed the day of her arraignment. Spectators, neighbors, teachers, churchgoers filed into the benches, whispering in disbelief. The prosecutor laid out the charges with cold precision. Fraud, identity theft, falsification of public records, grand larceny, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the government, over $200,000 misappropriated, dozens of forged documents, false identities, emotional damage to an entire community, and the name Danny Delaney, repeated over and over again, his imaginary presence now etched into legal history. Lila said nothing. No plea for mercy. No denial. Just a whispered guilty when asked how she would respond to the charges. For those who had known her, it was surreal. The woman who had once shared recipes at the church potluck, who led children's crafts at the community center, was now being led away in shackles. The facade was shattered, and what lay beneath wasn't a monster, but something more disturbing. Someone who could look you in the eye and smile while feeding you a lie. Reporters descended on the town like vultures. Cameras outside the courthouse captured community members in tears, others shouting into microphones, demanding justice. But justice felt abstract now. The damage had already been done. The police impounded the mannequin, along with the scrapbooks, photo albums, and fabricated documents. Every piece of Danny's imagined life was logged, labeled, and sealed away in evidence boxes. Jennings watched as the last box was loaded into the van. It was labeled simply, Delaney, Evidence, Room 4. But there was no Delaney. There never had been. Only Lila, and the fantasy that had swallowed a town whole. The emotional aftershocks hit Willow Creek harder than any headline ever could. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the intimacy of it. Lila hadn't conned strangers in some faceless system. She had deceived people who knew her, who trusted her, who had shared pieces of their lives with her. For 12 years, she wove Danny into the fabric of the community. And now that thread had been pulled, unraveling everything in its wake. There were families who'd celebrated birthdays with Danny, children who had drawn pictures for him, adults who had written Christmas cards addressed to a child that never existed. The town's grief was strange and murky, mourning not for a life lost, but for the realization that there had never been one to mourn at all. At the church, Reverend Marshall delivered a sermon the Sunday after Lila's arrest. He stood at the pulpit, the same place where he had once blessed Danny with anointing oil, and now looked out over a sea of stunned, searching faces. "We believed because we wanted to," he said softly. "Because hope is easier than doubt. Because kindness can blind us. And that is not weakness, it is humanity." Some nodded. Others wept. A few walked out. Local businesses began revisiting the donations they'd made over the years to help Danny. The community fundraiser to buy him a bicycle. The church clothing drive that had provided jackets and winter boots. The school supply donations that had quietly ended up unused. It all had to be reconciled now, if not financially, then emotionally. The community center posted signs for grief counseling. But even that word, grief, felt hard to define. It wasn't for a death. It wasn't for a crime of violence. It was for a loss of trust, a breach of belief. The emotional toll was subtler than blood, but no less deep. Jennings, who had spearheaded the investigation, found himself avoiding grocery stores and community gatherings. Not because people blamed him, but because every interaction seemed to end with the same question. How did we let this happen? Whispers turned into theories. Some insisted Lila had to be mentally ill. Others weren't so forgiving. You don't forge documents, steal money, and fabricate an entire person unless you know exactly what you're doing, one resident said during a town forum. This wasn't confusion. It was a performance. Yet, even in the anger, there were fractures of empathy. Some wondered what pain had driven Lila to this point. What emptiness could compel someone to sculpt a life from silence and shadows? Children began to ask hard questions. Was Danny ever real? One young girl asked her mother, clutching a birthday card she had once drawn for him. "No, baby," her mother said, her voice cracking. "But we believed he was. And that's what makes it hurt." In that pain, something profound settled over Willow Creek. Not just loss, but caution. Because now they understood something they never wanted to admit. Even in a town where everyone knows your name, a lie, if told with enough love and consistency, can live undetected for years. The trial began in the dead of winter, under a thick Ohio sky that pressed down on Willow Creek like a judgment of its own. By the time Lila appeared in court, escorted through the courthouse by 2 deputies, the town had already rendered its verdict. The courtroom, though small, was standing room only. Reporters lined the back walls. Former friends, former neighbors, even parents who once organized birthday gift lists for Danny now sat shoulder to shoulder in icy silence. Lila wore no makeup. No cardigan. Just the standard orange jumpsuit and a face that had long since dropped its rehearsed expressions. She didn't look around. Didn't search for familiar faces. She sat still, as if surrendering to the slow, heavy machinery of justice. The prosecution's opening statement was searing. They painted her not as delusional, but as calculated, a woman who committed one of the most elaborate frauds in Ohio's history. They walked the jury through every forged document, every welfare check, every photo manipulated to preserve the illusion of Danny Delaney. It wasn't just the money. It was the intent, the fake custody battle, the fictional father, the child support she had claimed from a man who didn't exist, the community fundraisers she exploited, the social services she tapped into under false pretenses. Each act wasn't isolated. It was part of a deliberate design. Lila's defense attorney attempted to argue diminished capacity. They called a psychologist to the stand who spoke of trauma, loneliness, and a dissociative coping mechanism rooted in the miscarriage Lila suffered before Danny came into being. The jury listened, solemn-faced. But sympathy could only stretch so far in the face of meticulous, documented deception. In a powerful moment, Officer Jennings testified, not as a law enforcer, but as a witness to the unraveling. He recounted finding the mannequin, the staged bedroom, the countless photo albums. It was like walking through a museum dedicated to someone who never lived, he said. Except she believed it, or wanted us to. When Lila took the stand, her voice was low, measured. She didn't deny the acts. She didn't try to defend them. I know what I did, she said. But for 12 years, I woke up every morning and gave my son breakfast. I tucked him in every night. He smiled at me because I needed him to. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing was swift. 5 years for fraud. 7 for identity theft. Restitution of $213,478. No eligibility for parole before serving 85% of her sentence. Lila blinked once. Didn't flinch. Jennings stood in the back of the courtroom, watching the woman who had turned an entire town into the set of her carefully constructed fiction. He expected to feel satisfaction, closure, but instead, there was only a hollow kind of mourning. Not for Lila, not even for the community, but for the child that never existed, yet somehow, everyone in town had known. Winter gave way to spring, and slowly Willow Creek began to breathe again. The frost on front porches thawed. Flowers started blooming in the cracks of sidewalks. But beneath the surface, a quiet reckoning continued. The town didn't talk about Lila in public much anymore. People were tired. Tired of interviews, tired of side glances, tired of explaining to outsiders how something so impossible had happened right under their noses. But the healing, while slow, was real. The church held a community vigil, not for Danny exactly, but for the grief his absence represented. Dozens of people showed up. Some brought candles. Others brought old cards and drawings once meant for a boy who never lived. The pastor read from Psalm 34 verse 18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. It wasn't a sermon about Lila. It wasn't a sermon about deception. It was about what comes after. At the community center, volunteers began organizing real outreach efforts. Programs for at-risk youth, single-parent support groups, a new initiative to verify the identities of recipients before donations were made, not out of suspicion, but accountability. Trust had to be earned again, and for some, it never would be. There were people who moved away, who left Willow Creek behind with a bitter taste in their mouths. Too many shadows, one woman said. Too many ghosts. But most stayed. Most chose to rebuild. Officer Jennings quietly declined a promotion offered to him in the state capitol. My work's not done here, he told the chief. He spent his time checking in on folks more than writing tickets. Talking more. Listening harder. Because now he understood. The things people don't say often matter more than the things they do. A mural was painted on the side of the community center. It didn't depict Danny. It didn't mention Lila. It showed a group of children holding hands beneath a banner that read, "Every child deserves to be seen." Some whispered that the mural was ironic. Others called it healing. But either way, it became a symbol, not just of what was lost, but what could still be found. Lila, now incarcerated at a correctional facility outside Dayton, received no visitors. Not a single neighbor. Not a former friend. No letters came, save for occasional inquiries from journalists hoping to sensationalize her story. But she never responded. The fantasy had ended, and in its wake, there was only silence. In one last symbolic act, the town retired Danny Delaney's name from all school rosters, community databases, and donation lists. It was a kind of burial, though no grave was needed. Because what Lila created was not a child. It was a mirror, held up to the faces of a town that wanted to believe in something so badly, they never thought to look twice. Willow Creek may never fully recover, but it has changed, and change is its own kind of justice. What lingered after Lila's sentencing wasn't just shame or confusion. It was a hard-earned vigilance. The town, once content to take people at their word, now listens a little closer, watches a little longer, and asks the questions it once avoided. Not out of cynicism, but out of care. There are still nights when porch lights flicker over empty sidewalks and someone glances toward Lila's old house, shuttered and silent. The red wagon is gone now. So is the swing. The flowers that once framed the front steps have withered, choked by neglect. It stands like a monument to a story the town can't quite let go of. A few residents still struggle to talk about it. They don't bring up Danny by name. Instead, they say things like the situation or what happened. But others have started speaking more freely, especially at the community center meetings. They talk about mental health, about loneliness, about how easily a person can disappear in plain sight, even in a town where everybody claims to know everybody. The children, too young to grasp the full complexity of Lila's lie, remember Danny in strange, half-formed ways. One boy said he dreamed of playing catch with him. A girl swore she remembered him clapping at her dance recital. But those memories, like fog, fade when you try to hold them. And maybe that's the final tragedy of it. In a world overflowing with content, faces, and stories, Lila's lie worked because it gave people something they wanted to believe in. A mother doing her best. A boy growing up happy. A family imperfect but full of love. She sold the idea of hope wrapped in hardship, and everyone bought it. But now Willow Creek moves forward, one day at a time. With bruises. With lessons. With eyes a little more open. They've begun hosting truth circles at the library, safe spaces where people can speak freely about things they've kept hidden. One woman confessed to faking her way through her divorce. Another admitted her son wasn't in college, like she'd told everyone, but in rehab. No judgment. No whispers. Just truth. Because they've learned the cost of silence. Jennings still patrols the streets, a quiet presence. He visits the community center every Wednesday and sits in the back, listening more than he speaks. When asked about Lila's case, he doesn't give interviews. He only says, "We lost a boy who never lived. But we found a town that almost forgot how to feel." And in the end, maybe that's the story that matters most. Not about the crime. Not about the fraud. But about what we choose to see. And what we choose to ignore. Because every story has two sides, but the truth waits in the shadows. Join us as we uncover the hidden truths, the unspoken betrayals, and the moments that define survival. Subscribe now to follow every twist and turn, because in the world of true crime, justice is just the beginning.